So this is me, like the sign says, Blake Vince, Merlin, Ontario. And a few of these slides will be repeat for some of the audience that was here yesterday at the start. So today at home, we grow corn, like Iowa, soybeans and winter wheat. And to give you an idea, I always talk about corn heat units. This is the Canadian version, or relative maturity. So we're growing 102-day to 113-day corn hybrids, about 2.7 RM to 3.3 relative maturity for soybeans. And we use winter wheat, and that's a great opportunity for us to establish cover crops. So this is Canada, and all the arrows point towards home. That little point here in the bottom of Lake Erie is Point Pelee National Park, this tip, and that's the same longitude, or latitude rather, as Rome and Barcelona, Spain. And on that tip of land is where my wife, Karen, our daughter, Cora, and our son, Elliot, and myself are standing 2 years ago. And so water is very important to me because I'm an avid ice fisherman. Does anybody care that I like to drink water too? But anyways, nonetheless, you know, as people on this planet, as farmers, we need to realize the importance of our soil and how that reflects towards water quality. And this picture was taken in 2011 from satellite imagery, and this is what motivated me to apply for my Nuffield Farming Scholarship that I'm going to talk about. And so we can see here these blue-green algae blooms. And to break it down, like I said, Toledo's here in the bottom, they have their water shut off. Cleveland over here, their water intake's over here somewhere as well. Detroit, Michigan's up here. The Little Lake St. Clair. That land bridge that I live on probably has some of the highest agricultural diversity that you'll find anywhere on the planet. Fruit trees, to today's mainstream agricultural crops like wheat, corn, soybeans, processing tomatoes, greenhouses, tobacco, on and on and on. The only exception where I've seen increased diversity of plants is probably California. So with this intensive agriculture, we can see that there is a little bit of a bloom going out of the Thames River, which is just at the top corner of that white square. And that's where my water from our farm comes from. Our water goes from our farm, goes into the Thames River, has to come around the Lake St. Clair, down through the Detroit River, and then emptying into Lake Erie. As well, there's another little river that helps drain the majority of southwestern Ontario, the Sydenham. So as agriculturalists in Ontario, we have reverted away from no-till, which really took off in the 80s, back to full-surface tillage. And this picture really concerns me, because where that white box is where our municipal water inlet is for the county that I live in. And as a family man, and as a farmer, I think I have a right to be concerned. And so I share that with people. I'm not a phosphorus expert, but like the words of Einstein, those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act. So when I know that there's a better way, a better methodology, I thought it was my responsibility to throw my name in the hat, to apply for this scholarship, to see if I could find a better methodology to try and correct the problems that we have today with Lake Erie. Because my farming colleagues, your farming colleagues in the states of Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan, were doing something proactively about this problem, a resource that we share for millions of people around that lake, and yet nothing was happening in Ontario. At least the effort was mute, okay? And because I'm just Joe Farmer, like all of you, the majority of you in the room, I don't have any accreditation behind my name. This was an opportunity for me to get some accreditation and hopefully be a voice that could be heard. So what's a Nuffield Scholarship? Well, Lord Nuffield was born William Morris in London, England, or just outside of London, England. He's the inventor of the MG automobile and the Nuffield tractor, which went on to be the British Leyland. He's the founder of Morris Garages in England, founder of the Nuffield Farming Scholarship Trust. So upon his demise, him and his wife unfortunately did not have any family, but they amassed all this wealth during the Second World War. And it was the Queen that gave him the title of Lord Nuffield. And these scholarship trusts were founded in England. They started in Canada in 1950. They're found throughout the Commonwealth countries of the globe. Unfortunately, as American citizens, you're not part of the Commonwealth since you left the King so many years ago. But nonetheless, we have an association with an Eisenhower Fellowship here in the U.S., and they're found today throughout the Commonwealth, like Australia, New Zealand, Zimbabwe. But outside of the Commonwealth now, countries like France have come on to join us, Brazil, and it looks like China is debating about joining us as well, and the Netherlands, sorry, before I forget. So today in Canada, there's 3 of these scholarships awarded annually, and I was fortunate enough to receive one. And the scholar chooses a topic, he or she chooses a topic of their interest, and is required to submit a paper after 2 years. So as a farmer, that's sort of outside of my scope. I'm quite comfortable digging in the soil, driving a tractor, but to physically take the time and sit down and write a paper, that was kind of daunting for me. So most importantly, after that, we provide like an oral dissertation, which I've already done, and distribute the information that we've learned around the world here at home in Canada and now North America. And the biggest obligation from Nuffield Canada's perspective was that the scholar has 6 weeks abroad of consecutive travel. So leaving my wife and my 2 children, was not only a strain for myself, but obviously a big obligation for my wife to take on as she works full-time off the farm. So I visited, over my 2 years of study, I visited 11 different countries around the world. And I traveled with 7 Aussies, a Kiwi, a gentleman from New Zealand, a Brit, and myself. So there was 10 of us who traveled together, all with different cross-sections of agriculture. And that was a global focus program through Nuffield. So we were all Nuffield Scholars together, had a great time. We were away for these 6 weeks together. And one of my first visits, we flew into Hawaii, my wife and I met with the gentleman because my topic of study is conserving farmland with cover crops, and the risks at the time was the risks of cellulosic energy. And my Aussie friends wanted me to drop the negative out of the title. So now it's, and the importance of biodiversity. So conserving farmland with cover crops and the importance of biodiversity. So my Aussie mates, as they like to be referred to, really taught me the importance of keeping things positive. Okay? So while I went from Hawaii as a little last-minute excursion, I met with a Dr. John McHugh, who works for Pioneer. And they're using cover crops for dust control because the voting population, the largest people in Hawaii, don't like the nuisance of agriculture. So they have to plant cover crops just to keep the dust down. Who cares about the soil benefit? Just keep the dust down, keep it off our windows, right? So I get to Australia after Hawaii, and I was there for 2.5 weeks on my own traveling around before I met up with my team of fellow scholars. And I saw this picture. And I'm not sure if it was the words that resonated with me or I was already starting to feel homesick for my kids. This little guy sort of reminded me of my own son. And it's soil. It's at the heart of your business and ours too. And this is in Queensland. And this is my first trivia question for this presentation. Can anybody tell me what this residue is? Sugar cane. Looks a lot like corn stalks, doesn't it? Sugar cane's a perennial crop. 4 years in a row, as the sugar cane production drops down, then they plant a break crop for disease, increased sugar yield, and they plant soybeans. Okay? So here in North America, in Iowa, the great state of Iowa, the corn capital of the United States of America, abundant topsoil, everybody has to do all this copious amounts of tillage. Why? Why do they have to do all this tillage? What's the big excuse from a farmer? Pardon?
The way we've always done it.
The way we've always done it. What's another excuse? Why do we have to do all this tillage?
Aerate the soil.
What's another excuse? Weed control. What's another excuse? Those damn BT corn stalks are so hard to decompose, they just got to do it, can't do it another way. Right? We've heard that all before. This is way more tons of biomass being left totally undisturbed. Those soybeans are no-tilled in. 15 tons per acre per year of biomass that's accumulated on the soil surface. And when you pull the sugarcane back, it is just inundated with soil fungi. All those fruiting bodies are visual indicators that the soil is alive. And we got to get away from bacterial-dominated soil back to fungal-dominated soil. At least more of a balance towards fungal and less bacteria. Whoops. So a multitude of fungi. So Aussie soybeans, a thing of beauty. Now, how many people in this room would like to call that crop their own? How many people would think that that's a non-GMO soybean crop? And would they be proud to take that? I've seen Roundup Ready soybean fields that aren't nearly that clean. Look at the nodulation, just tremendous. But sadly enough, I want you to pay attention to the color of this soil. Because in this next slide, it's a stark comparison. It's side by side virtually. So this is high production vegetable production, high output vegetable production rather, in Australia. They burnt off all the carbon, all that black organic material, sound familiar? And they're left with sand. And you can see a nice plume in the background as he's putting down his plastic, trying to conserve moisture in a drip irrigation scenario. And up until that point, this is the largest field I'd ever seen, 5 kilometers in one direction. So, what's that, 2 miles almost? A little bit over 2 miles? So I said, do you ever fall asleep? Oh, he says, heck yeah, we just set the alarm on and we'll walk home. You know, they got the television in there, they got the radio blaring, whatever, have naps, pretty cool. And I just sat there and I was like, wow, utter amazement. Because our farms, we're lucky to have 2 farms, which will be 2 square hundred back to back, okay? And that was just incredible for me. So from Australia, after I met up with my team of players, this is one of the first places we went as a group, New Zealand. And New Zealand, when we think of Lord of the Rings, right, that movie, how lush and green and beautiful everything is, where it was filmed, this is on the North Island and they were in a flat-out drought. This was the only cornfield around that was green because it was pasture for 7 years and they no-till it right in. And if you're a dairyman, those corn ears are filled right to the tip. And I think a lot of guys in this room can appreciate how much biomass and how much forage value is there. And there again, New Zealand, non-GMO. No GMOs are allowed in New Zealand, and it's a pretty respectable crop. And it just shows the power of carbon and the power of no-till to retain water to increase crop productivity. There again, just touching on the plants. So we went from New Zealand, we came back to Canada for a week-long conference where all the scholars from my year met. And then we went to Washington, D.C. We learned how important the lobby is as it pertains to agriculture in America. From there, we went down to Mexico. And because we went to Mexico first and then back to California, and I'll touch on that in a second, we went down to Mexico because Easter was early in 2013. And Catholicism is still alive and well in Mexico. And one of the places we went to was Summit. So that's the home of a fellow Iowan, famous Iowan, Norman Borlaug, and the Green Revolution. And it was, Norman's efforts that he was looking after the impoverished people on this planet. And here's some pictures of hybrid wheat production. And that's all touched by human hands, all those little pieces of paper. So when you have a proximity to a lot of inexpensive labor, you can do things like that. And this is what an 11 ton per hectare wheat crop looks like. So that's about 180, 175 bushels of wheat. So that would rival some corn crops. The problem is, this is when my epiphany started to happen. And this is ground penetrating radar. And it measures the rooting depth of wheat. And this is some of the data in the bottom that shows up. And what they shared with us that day is there's a direct correlation between above ground biomass and below ground roots. So in a dry environment like Mexico, water is everything. And where there's water, there's a crop. And where there's no water, there is no crop. It's night and day, black and white, salt and pepper, crazy. And the forefathers of that Mexico area, Obregon, Mexico, at least had the foresight to think about water infrastructure. So they take the water coming out of the mountains and down into the valley. The problem is now is that the non-farming populations are growing at such a rate that they're struggling between non-farming for human consumption and farmers for crop production. So the chicken and egg scenario. Being a producer of winter wheat, the thing that resonated with me the most was we were breeding wheat varieties at home to be shorter and shorter and shorter, saying that the straw was a nuisance crop. There's not livestock production. But the breeders in Mexico said we have to have certain straw height to get root height. So if I'm going to want to extract water from my soil to fill out those grain heads, do I not want to have enough certain ratio of straw to get grain? And Carlos Crobetto from Chile, who I'm going to introduce you to in a second, said it best: straw for the man, or grain for man, sorry, straw for the land. And in our neck of the woods, straw is a wasted resource. They bale it off, they sell it to mushroom farms for compost. We need every bit of straw on our farm. So we went from Mexico to Synod, and that was the big thing that really struck me as a chord, because here we've got all this water, we're struggling for production versus consumption. The other problem is, with that 11 ton per hectare, that 180, 170 bushel crop of wheat, they're pouring on copious amounts of nitrogen fertilizer, copious amounts of fungicide, and copious amounts of water. You know, and therein lies the problem. So we go back up to California, and this is just prior to the onset of the drought. And the same thing in California, we were there, and the diversity of agriculture is just stunning. But as North Americans, California produces 50% of North America's fresh fruits and vegetables. One segment of our landscape produces North America's 50%, so Canada as well. And I see the soil in Iowa, and I love this group because you're thinking outside the box, you got some creativity, you got some positive energy. You can grow these vegetable crops in Iowa. And I really don't understand why that production system isn't here. Because of logistics, you know, we can spread that out. Yes, we're only going to get one crop a year, where California might get 2.3. But as we struggle for water, for human consumption, this becomes an even greater role. And in the lobby, there again, the lobby in California, with the environmentalists, are worried about the freshwater aquifers and protecting the small freshwater smelt. But as a North American who loves to eat, you can tell that with my profile, okay? As a North American who loves to eat, you know, I'm concerned, are we going to have enough food for everybody? You know, is this a concern for you folks? I should see heads nodding, yes, it is, Blake. Okay? So we go from California, or Mexico, to California, we go down to Brazil. And this is where every island farmer should stand up and shut it. In this picture, what you don't see is this corn is beautiful. There's not a speck of disease. And across the road, the independent road that we're on this property, is a field of corn that's 3 feet tall. But more importantly is, as we pulled onto the property, there was a field of corn that was ready for harvest. Brazil grows 2.7 crops a year of the same commodities you and I grow, and we get one kick the cat. The technology that you and I support or pay technology fees towards, Roundup Ready, on and on and on, go to help develop varieties and hybrids for this marketplace. And yet we're on the perpetual buying motion. And I'm being a little cynical, but not really. Like, just think about that. And so what I saw how at risk my business was. Because as a farmer, my price is based like your price off Chicago. So when Brazil has a big crop, what happens to Chicago? Down it goes. As Brazil doesn't have a crop, up she goes. And we're just on this roller coaster. And I'm thinking, well, how do I decrease volatility? Isn't that about staying in business on a level playing field? And it really, resonated with me. And I'm thinking, how at risk my business is. In Canada, we grow 2 million acres of corn a year presently. Monsanto and DuPont right now have their eye on the prize of Western Canada. They think there's a potential for another 1 million acres of corn. The only thing today in Canada is we have a positive basis because our dollar is subpar to the US. But in the event that we start exporting more bushels of grain on an annual basis, what's that going to do to our basis level? Even if they only grow 100 bushel out west, that's another 100 million bushels on 1 million acres. So in Brazil, I pull back this canopy, this beautiful corn, and underneath there's that understory crop, brachiaria grass, that's been interseeded in soybeans at senescence the year before. So it's protecting the soil in a hot environment in the tropics like Brazil. That's everything to keep soil cool. So if they can do that in Brazil, why can't we do that in North America? We asked. On this field here, this is at a friend of mine's farm. He's doing his PhD on glyphosate-resistant weeds in Brazil. And this is his parents' farm. They had just harvested soybeans the day before. That's on Saturday, and on Sunday morning, they got up the corn planter and they went to work. So it's perpetual motion. And if you look at the staging, those are beans to the right. You know, they've got a few more weeks to go. They're just starting to show their colors. But it's just on and on and on. And like standing in Brazil, it's like standing in a sea of soybeans. Like I'm standing on the bow of a ship, on the Titanic. Jack, everybody knows that scene from Titanic, right? And there it is. And does this look familiar to anybody here in Iowa? Anybody see this weed here in Iowa? Consia is the Latin name. Mare's tail, fleabane, same family. Sound familiar? This is getting to be a global problem. And it's more uncommon in Brazil, where I was, to see a clean field than a field with weed resistance. Not a bad looking crop of beans. But when you get up close and look, the pods are spaced out. This was taken a year ago in the fall, not on my GFP, but in Brazil nonetheless. The other thing when we were there, it was funny, 2013, we had just taken off a decent crop in 2012. Everybody knows what happened in 2012 here at home? Drought, right? So we had beans, luckily we had crop, but we had beans in storage. And the ABMs, the Cargills, the Bungies, they're all players in Brazil. And they're saying to the farmers here at home, big crop coming in Brazil, boys. They're going to throw beans at the bin. Want to capitalize on this marketplace. But where'd the crop go? Nowhere but up. We get to Brazil, and we talk to farmers, how's this for a crop? Oh, this is a bad crop. There's no crop here. So all the players that are here in North America are there in Brazil too. We need to do our own renaissance. We need to do our own detective work with social media. That's a valuable tool that can work to our benefit as farmers. There again, when I pull that canopy back, it's just inundated. Beautiful no-till conditions, lots of residue, and lots of fruiting bodies. Lots of fungi. And some people say, well, you're going to have sclerotinia too. Well, yeah, you're going to have some sclerotinia, but some old farmers that I've heard is no mold, no gold. Anybody? No? So one of the places I got to go, this is on my own, so a year later, I got home. I came into the great states of North Dakota, South Dakota, and then back in Iowa, and had a nice tour more on the west side of the state. And where I see that no-till and conservation farming practices are alive and well is 100% reflective to very good advocates. Where there's no advocate, where there's no voice, those practices really decline steeply. And what I see as well is there's a direct correlation between those who have offensive soils, highly productive soil like you, majority of you in this room have in Iowa, versus those that have defensive soil that I have at home. Heavy Brookston clay soil, glacial lake bottom soil. So this is in Chile. This is Carlos Crevetta. Probably one of the greatest no-till pioneers you'll find. He's written a book, 5 different languages. And he's the man that said, grain for the man, straw for the land. And this is what soil looks like with long-term no-till. Environment like Chile, and there's a close-up of it. All well aggregated, beautiful residue, incredible stuff. And the sad thing is that Chile was a net exporter of grain up the Pacific coast to California during the gold rush. Today, Carlos is the exception. Because through tillage and erosion, he's one of the few farmers left. Where do you see these eucalyptus and Monterey pine, and that was brought into Chile from California, the Monterey pine, are all great big deep ravines. So the slope, the erosion, took the soil off the surface, created these great big erosion gullies, or ravines, and because they're ravines, they're not really gullies, they're big ravines, you can't farm them anymore because of the slope. Took it out to the river and ultimately the ocean. So does this story start to sound familiar of where we're going? America. And this is in Argentina. You know, dry environment, they're in a bit of a drought. This is sunflower production, but then again, you look at the mulch down below, and this field was one of the few that still had its bloom, I'll call it. Okay, it looked a little better than most because it's conserving its moisture on the bottom with all the residue. And this is quite common. I touched on this yesterday through my presentation, how I think we need to get back to ruminants on the landscape, and I'm not sure if we need to go this extreme with cowboys or not, but it's just a cool picture, I thought, the gauchos out there on the range. And look familiar, some nice Angus cross. And there again, my favorite Roundup Ready weed, Conzia, Roundup resistant. It's there in Argentina as well. So what really caught me and I paid attention to was, if we think about where corn production is in this room, what do we see that's different here versus where we are in North America? Right away. We've got 2 ears, right? Most hybrids today, they want to go with a single ear, higher population. But in Argentina, rain, where I was in this region, was a bit of a premium. So they're breeding specifically hybrids with higher instance of multiplicity, more than 1 ear. So on a good year, when there's lots of rain, both ears spill way out. But and with lower population, so they're dropping about 19 to 20,000, so they can keep their seed costs down, because on a dry year, everything dries up. And so why do you want to plant 36,000 seeds and not have enough population? This way, on a good year, you don't lose yield. It's more stability for the long haul. And I always joke, like, if I sold this corn crop to one of my customers, you know, a lot of them had their hands around my neck. But that is a high yielding hybrid in Argentina. So it's all about perception, right? It's all about the environment in which we live in. And there again, the name of the game is, limiting factor is water. And Argentina too has the opportunity to grow more than 1 crop a year. Freshly harvested field of corn silage, followed closely with the second crop of corn. In the background you see this massive dairy operation that was designed in a designed barn. I think there's over 5,000 cows in that dairy. Pretty incredible. And in that working model on that farm, they don't own 1 piece of machinery. It's all custom done. They've got 10 on-site agronomists, with each agronomist has a backpack and a dirt bike. And he's responsible for so many acres. He's responsible to calibrate the grain drill when he comes to the farm, calibrate the sprayer. And he makes sure he has the right seeding rate. He looks for diseases, he looks for pests, he looks for all kinds of different things on those said acres. And it was a pretty cool working model, really. And this farm was 10,000 hectares. Okay, so there's and it was 10,000 hectares of a much larger farming operation of 100,000 hectares, which has land in Argentina, Chile, and Brazil, and it's traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So this is in Paraguay. You got all this residue, and the corn's just coming up. You know, it looks kind of erratic, but it's there, and you know, it's going to do its own thing. And they're going to have lots of biological activity, beneficial insects there, digging in the soil. And those beans in Argentina look like they're 60 plus bushel, all well potted, nice tight clusters. But what the scholarship allowed me to do outside of agriculture was it allowed me to get outside my comfort zone, get outside of my farm, and look at the world from a bigger perspective. And not being limited on my vocabulary in Spanish, I ran into this couple one day, and I had to really use sign language to get my message across. So in Argentina, the gold bar is the American dollar. And if you go to the bank, the exchange rate is 80 pesos for 1 US dollar. But if you buy it on the street, you get 13 pesos for 1 US dollar. So I walked in, I'm very limited on cash. I didn't know what the currency situation was going to be like in Paraguay, where I was going next. And I didn't want to be overexposed with a bunch of useless Argentinian pesos. So being the social guy that I am, I said, okay, how am I going to figure this out? So I go to every big place that Argentinians hanging out, and that's an ice cream shop, because the ice cream is just to die for in Argentina. And they had their simple counter set up here in the front with the, with different varieties of ice cream. And then behind it, just some simple tables. So I walk in the restaurants, broad daylight, of course, and I just sort of, I have who's the customer. So I walk in the end, there's a lady sitting over here in the corner, and I just sort of simply say, pesos blue, pesos blue. And she could speak English, but she wouldn't deal with it. So I turn around, and much to my chagrin, I see here's a guy, he's got a Calvin sitting on his shirt. He a pioneer guy at the time, I thought, I don't really want to deal with a guy from Calvin. But nonetheless, I said, pesos blue, pesos blue. And I opened up my wallet, and I flashed an American dollar bill, $120 bill, and the white, typical good white fashion, she gives her husband a flying elbow. And she starts pointing, and she starts speaking in Spanish and sign language. I knew that she was committed. By the commotion, this lady that wouldn't talk to me, all of a sudden comes up. She comes down and she says, can I help? Can I help? And this woman that was with me, she puts her hand up, she says, in Spanish, I'm sure, we go bug off, we got under control. So we get up out of the restaurant, and I've got my cell phone out, and I've got all these beautiful pictures. We're walking down the street, and she's telling me that her son lived in broken English and broken Spanish, that her son was living in the U.S. So we walk down the ATM, and we're standing on the street, husband and I. She gets the cash in hand, and then she turns off, she bowls across the street. I'm going, what's going on? Well, she didn't get the right change. So I'm showing the husband pictures of corn at home, and he goes, what's this, DeKalb corn? Well, let's get DeKalb corn. Jokingly, I said, no, he doesn't know that I work for Pioneer. I said, that's Pioneer corn. This man was an agronomist for 40 years with DeKalb. So just as we're doing money exchange, up comes his car around the corner, and they get out, this couple. Well, that's the son and daughter, and he can speak perfect English. And right away he looks at me and starts laughing. And he says, when my parents told me there was some English guy here, I was expecting some young strapping guy, and I said, yeah, he got stuck with some fat bald Canadian. Anyways, they invite me out for drinks, and through the son being the translator, the father says to the son, tell this guy if I knew he worked for Pioneer, I would have never given him the money. And we just joked around, we teased back and forth. Well, they wanted to invite me back to their house for supper. And then the father says, the largest seed corn facility in the world for Cal Monsanto is right here at Pergamino. We'd like to tour you. I said, I love the opportunity, but I can't. I have to fly out to Fairwood. So these are the opportunities. I share that little story with you because these are the opportunities among many that I've been afforded through this scholarship. But, when you drive down the road, it could have said, the world's best beer is right over there. I wouldn't know what the sign said. And so when we have people that immigrate to our countries, whether they're the United States or they're Canada, I think we need to be more accepting because the world is getting to be a smaller and smaller place. And those people that immigrate to our country might be a marketing opportunity for a product that you're wanting to produce on your farm today, that somebody else isn't willing to adjust to their ideals to capitalize on. So one of the other places I got to go to talking about language barrier, luckily in Canada we have to speak French, or we have to take French from a young age. So I started taking French at age 5 in school, and I took French all the way through high school. I lived in the province of Quebec for 3 months on a high school exchange, so I can get by in French quite all right. So I went to France and I met with this man, Frédéric Thomas, and he's head of the Semi-Direct, the No-Till Association in France. And he has the opposite problem with his soil that I have. So I have heavy Brookston clay soil, old glacial lake bottom, and Frédéric has sand. So he's got a big sand layer, low organic matter, and then clay below. So what he's using is cover crops with no-till. And let's look at the miraculous changes that we can see in his soil. So we do the standard fence row test. On the right-hand side for neighbors, sand, yellow. On this side is his, nice, rich, dark, organic matter. And you can see it, like every good farmer, you judge it by the neighbor's corn crop, right? Oh, boy, George's corn doesn't look very good this year, does it? Just get your chest out there, somebody else's misery. But in all honesty, the corn on the right, because there's no organic matter, there's no carbon, was a disaster. Looking for water. And Frédéric's corn was brilliant. So we're increasing organic matter with cover crops and earthworms. So the earthworms are going down, they're taking all that residue, they're grabbing that clay and they're bringing it up, and through their excrement, like Jill Clapton said yesterday, with their poop, right? They spread it out on the soil surface and they're delving that. In Australia, they have a similar problem, but they do it with tillage. They take great big machines and they mix the clay with the sand. But we can do this biologically instead for a lot less capital cost. And here's an indicator of biological activity, all this feather moss in between the corn plants. And there's a corn crop just towards the end of the year, filled out right to the tip. And this young lady, she's using cover crops. She's in southern France. But what you don't take into consideration is that her altitude is a lot higher than mine, so she's considerably cooler, even though she is so far south. But the unique story with Sarah, and she was my Nuffield mentor, and I met her just by chance. David Brandt from Ohio introduced me to Sarah at the National No-Till Conference in St. Louis, Missouri, because David is one of my longtime mentors for my cover crop project in Carroll, Ohio. And David says, Blake, I want you to meet this great young lady, Sarah, single. And I said to Sarah, would you happen to be a Nuffield Scholar? And I just read about Nuffield through the Furrow magazine. Any guys like that brand, Furrow magazine represents? Anybody here? Oh, you're doing a great clean up. They're going to fit your John Deere fan. Anyways, I know I'm in Iowa, so I got to be careful, right? Because you know the biggest difference between an American and a Canadian is the right to bear arms. And I'm not wearing my Kevlar vest today. So anyways, I'll just keep that to a minimum. But Sarah, you know, she says to me, we met up, we had a great time together at this conference, a lot in common, and she flew out the same day I did. She was flying off to No-Till on the plains, and I was flying home to Canada, and she said, I want you to promise me one thing, that you'll apply. Because you know and I know if you don't apply, you'll never be chosen. And as profound as that was, you know, pretty simple, but I owe a lot to her for seeing something in me that encouraged me to apply for my scholarship. But Sarah, being used a long time no-tiller, her father was a no-tiller and tragically died when Sarah was quite young, and she's running the farm now today and trying to keep on with what her father was doing. Guillaume, doing a lot of her custom work, noticed that Sarah's yields were as good, if not better, than everybody else's that he was harvesting for. So it caused him to adapt to cover crops as well. And in France, if you've ever been to France, they're very regionalized. We've all heard of Champagne. That comes from a specific region of France. And this man was growing sheep's milk, raising sheep's milk, for a special type of cheese called Roquefort cheese, which is like blue cheese. So it has to come from a special sheep, a special region, to make this special type of cheese. And it is, as a blue cheese fan, it's incredible. Now my wife, she's not fancy for cheese, but nonetheless, just for more for me to eat, so. As if I need that. Anyways, in the profile, that doesn't do me much justice, but nonetheless. But this is the sad thing. Here's Sarah, the contrast, right? Sarah's doing all this great work with cover crops, keeping the soil covered. And here we are. What you don't see in this picture is I'm standing on the road. This is me on the road. And basically about here, I'll say, I'm on the road. There's a bit of a wall. So I take the picture. When the rain comes, where does the soil go? Right on the road. Municipal workers come along with their trucks, they load the soil up, take it right back up to the top of the hill again. Now, if I was a farmer, or if I was a non-farmer and I was paying tax dollars for that, I wouldn't be too happy. And we can laugh all we want because we see similar things happen here. Maybe not necessarily on the road, but it's going in the water. You know, it's going to affect other things, other places. So this, my friends, is the next chapter. This is what I think can work for you folks in Iowa. In my environment where I am, I said I have winter wheat in rotation. We try to establish cover crops after winter wheat harvest. Because basically, if you think about it, the winter wheat dies in June, and there's no living root until next year when that corn crop's planted, and then no significant root mass really until June. So we've gone a full calendar year with a virtual desert of no living root in the soil. And like Dr. Joe Clapperton says, it's all about the rhizosphere. It's all about that area adjacent to the root that we're trying to capitalize on. In Iowa, everybody says, well, how can we get cover crops established? We grow corn and soybeans. You know, we don't have time to get biomass accumulation. This cover crop is established in Quebec, the province of Quebec, quite a bit further north than where you are here today, when the corn is 3 leaf tall. So they can drive out there, that's planted, so the corn's 30-inch centers, planted with a grain drill 6 inches apart, 3 rows, a mixed species. and it'll grow because the corn's already 3-leaf. It's just getting ready to go to that rapid elongation stage, getting ready to canopy, right? And it'll just sit there suppressed underneath the ear shoot until the plant starts to senesce, more light gets down in there, and then it starts to flush again and take off. And he never worried about that small plant taking away from the big plant because A, it's not a weed, and B, the big root always outcompetes the small root. So, the other thing that we're seeing is in a system like this, when you plant a Group 7 soybean, so a bean that's grown in Mississippi, Louisiana, that the root hairs, and I touched on this yesterday, of that corn, or that soybean, the root hairs of the corn are piercing the nodules on those vegetatively grown soybeans, extracting the nitrogen out that's being produced from the soybeans. So, at the end of pollination, they say there's still an incredible amount of nitrogen that needs to be taken up by the corn plant. How ideal is that? And how many guys in the room, and ladies, have you had a wet fall? Drive the combine, what happens up there? You get big ruts, right? If we can have living roots, driving on that, isn't that much better? The evapotranspiration, that's the biggest asset we can work towards. And I really think that this is where it's at. We can work these cover crops in a lot earlier. We touched on hypoxia in one of the situations. We can keep sediment on the soil. So that's harvested. You got all that residue down there. Yeah, I think it's great. Thank you very much.